A 22-year-old woman gets thrown out of her home with nothing until she buys an abandoned jewelry shop for $10 and discovers a hidden wall no one's touched in decades. What she finds inside isn't just valuable, it's a life someone never finished living. And the real question is, will she sell it or become it? If this story pulled you in even a little, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. It really helps more stories like this find the right people. And hey, I'm curious, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Emily Carter was 20. The morning she realized she didn't have a place to go anymore. There wasn't a dramatic fight, no screaming match that pushed things over the edge. It had been building quietly for months after her father passed. The house felt smaller, tighter, like every room was holding on to something unfinished. Her mother, Margaret, stopped speaking in full sentences. Conversations turned into instructions, then into complaints, and eventually into silence. Emily learned to read the air more than words, when to stay in her room, when to leave early, when not to come back until late. But that morning, it was different. She came home from a long shift at the jewelry repair shop, hands still smelling faintly of metal polish, and found a cardboard box sitting on the front porch. Not tossed, not messy placed. Inside were her things, not everything. Just the things that mattered enough to send a message. A few clothes, her tools, the small kit she'd built over years of learning to fix broken chains and resize rings. On top of it all, a folded note, short, careful handwriting. Emily, I think it's time you find somewhere else to stay. I need space, please don't come back. No anger in the words, that almost made it worse. She stood there longer than she expected to. Not crying, not knocking, just processing. The house behind that door had been her whole life. And now it was something she wasn't allowed to enter. There's a strange kind of clarity that hits when you realize no one is coming out to explain anything. So she picked up the box, adjusted the weight, and walked away. She didn't have a plan. Just a number in her bank account that barely crossed into double digits, and $40 in cash folded into her wallet. She called the only person she could think of, Frank Doyle, the owner of the small jewelry repair shop where she'd been working since she was 16. Frank was the kind of man who didn't ask unnecessary questions. When she told him she needed somewhere to stay, he just said, "Come by. We'll figure it out." And that was that. For a few months, she lived in the spare room above his shop. It wasn't much, just a narrow bed, a lamp, and a window that looked out over a quiet street, but it was safe. During the day she worked. Not glamorous work either. Fixing clasps, polishing tarnished silver, resizing rings that meant something to someone but came to her as just another job ticket. But Emily paid attention, she always had. She noticed how older pieces were made, how small details lasted decades if done right, how certain designs carried stories without saying a word. Frank would catch her sometimes, holding onto a piece a little longer than necessary, studying it. "You don't just fix things," he told her once. "You try to understand them." She didn't respond, but she remembered that. Still, she knew she couldn't stay there forever. Frank never pushed, but she could feel the unspoken timeline. So one night, sitting at the small kitchen table with her laptop and a cup of cheap coffee, she started searching for the impossible somewhere she could actually afford. Apartments were out of the question. Even the worst ones needed deposits she didn't have. Houses were worse. So she typed something almost as a joke, a cheapest property in Pennsylvania. That's how she found it. A listing buried on a county surplus site. A small commercial property in a town she'd never heard of, price $10. The description was barely their former jewelry shop. Vacant, sold as is. No photos except one blurry image of a narrow storefront with dusty windows and a faded sign you could barely read. Most people would be scrolled past it. Emily didn't. There was something about it. Not hope exactly. More like possibility stripped down to its bare bones. No promises, no illusions. Just a place that nobody wanted anymore. She showed it to Frank. He leaned in, squinted at the screen, then leaned back in his chair. "That's not a deal," he said. "That's a question." She looked at him. "What kind of question?" He shrugged. "The kind where you find out what you remade of after you say yes." She didn't think about it as long as she probably should have. Maybe because thinking too long would meant talking herself out of it. A week later she took a bus out to the town, signed the paperwork in a quiet county office, and handed over a $10 bill that felt heavier than any amount of money she'd ever spent. The shop was worse than the photo. The windows were clouded with years of dust. The door stuck when she tried to open it, like it hadn't been used in decades. Inside, the air smelled stale, like time had settled and never moved again. The display cases were empty. The workbench in the back was cluttered with old tools, tiny files, worn pliers, bits of metal scattered like someone had just stepped away mid-task and never returned. There was no electricity running, no heat, no sign that anything here had been alive for a long time. Emily stood in the middle of the room holding her bag, listening to the quiet. This was it, no backup plan. No one coming to check on her. Just a space that didn't care whether she succeeded or failed. And for the first time since she'd been kicked out of her home, she felt something steady settle in her chest. Not comfort, not confidence, just a simple, undeniable thought. If I'm going to build something, it starts here. The first full day Emily spent in the shop, she didn't try to fix anything. She didn't plug in tools or sort through the drawers or make plans about how she was going to turn this place into something livable. She just looked, really looked. There's a difference between seeing a place and understanding it. And she knew enough from the years she'd spent around Frank's shop that rushing that part usually meant missing something important. The front of the store was exactly what she expected: empty glass display cases, smudged and dull, like they'd been wiped 1,000 times and then forgotten. The old sign above the door, barely visible from inside, read Whitmore Jewelry, though the gold lettering had faded into something closer to a memory than a name. It didn't feel abandoned in a chaotic way, it felt paused, like someone had stepped out and never come back. She moved toward the back where the workbench sat, and that's where things started to shift. The bench itself was worn in a way that doesn't happen by accident. The wood had darkened where hands had rested over and over again. There were shallow grooves where tools had slipped, tiny burn marks near the edge, and a faint outline where a magnifying lamp must have been clamped for years. Emily ran her fingers along the surface without thinking, tracing those marks like they were a kind of language. Whoever had worked here hadn't been careless. Everything about the space said the opposite. The tools that were still there, files, pliers, a small torch, were old but not junk. They were used, maintained, and then left exactly where they belonged. That didn't match the idea of someone just walking away. She started opening drawers. Most were empty or close to it. A few had scraps of metal, broken chains, bits of clasps that looked like they'd been kept just in case. She recognized that habit immediately. Frank did the same thing: never throw away something that could be useful later. It made her pause. People who think like that don't usually leave everything behind. Not without a reason. By the second day, she had a routine. Sweep the floors, open the windows, let the stale air move. She brought in a cheap lamp so she wouldn't have to rely on daylight fading too early. At night, the shop felt different. Quieter but also more present. Every sound carried. The creak of the floor, the soft tap of a tool shifting when she moved something else. It forced her to slow down, to pay attention. And that's when she noticed it. It wasn't obvious. That's what made it stand out. Behind the main display counter, there was a section of wall that didn't quite match the rest. Same paint, same general color, but the texture was slightly off. Not enough that anyone would catch it at a glance, but enough that once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Emily stood there longer than she meant to, just looking at it, trying to figure out what exactly felt wrong. She stepped closer, ran her hand along the surface, smooth in most places, but then there, a faint line, too straight to be a crack, too deliberate to be damage. She didn't get excited, not right away. If anything, she got more careful. She went back to the workbench, grabbed one of the thinner tools, a flathead, worn but still solid, and came back to the wall. Pressed gently along the seam. Nothing. She adjusted the angle, applied a little more pressure. Still nothing. For a moment she almost laughed at herself. Maybe it was just bad paint. Maybe she was reading into something that wasn't there, because she wanted there to be more to this place than what she could see. Then the edge gave slightly. Not a loud click, not a dramatic shift. Just a small, quiet movement, like something that hadn't been touched in years, finally deciding to respond. She froze for a second, then tried again, a little firmer this time. The panel moved inward, just enough to create a gap. Dust fell from the edge in a soft line down the wall. Her heartbeat picked up, but not in a panicked way. More like a focus sharpening. She set the tool down and used both hands, easing the panel open slowly. It wasn't heavy, just stiff, resistant. Like it didn't want to be rushed. When it finally gave way, the space behind it revealed itself in pieces, not all at once. First darkness, then shapes. Then, she adjusted her position and the light hit at a different angle. Details. Shelves, small, shallow, built into the wall itself, and on those shelves boxes. Not many, maybe half a dozen different sizes. Some wood, some velvet, all covered in a thin layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in a very long time. Emily didn't reach for them immediately. She just stood there taking it in, letting her brain catch up to what she was seeing. This wasn't random storage. This was intentional, hidden, but organized. Meant to be found or maybe meant not to be. She pulled the first box out carefully. It was lighter than she expected. Set it down on the counter, brushed the dust off with the side of her hand, and opened it. Inside was a ring. Gold, simple at first glance, but when she picked it up and turned it slightly under the light, the details started to show. Hand engraved. Not flashy, not overloaded, just precise. The kind of work that takes time and patience and someone who knows exactly what they're redoing. Emily felt that familiar instinct kick in, the one that made her study pieces a second longer than necessary. She wasn't thinking about price. She was thinking about process, about the hands that made it. She opened another box, then another. Necklaces, small pendants, a pair of earrings that didn't match anything she'd seen in stores. Some pieces were older, clearly worn before being set aside. Others looked like they had never left the shop. None of them were identical. No mass production, no shortcuts. Each one felt like its own decision. At the back of the shelf, tucked behind the others, was a smaller container. Not decorative. Just a plain, worn case that looked like it had been opened and closed more times than the rest. She hesitated before picking it up. Not because she was scared, but because something about it felt different. Like whatever was inside mattered in a way the others didn't. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small leather pouch, folded over itself, and beneath it, an envelope. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, the edges soft but intact. No name on the outside. Just there. Emily sat down without realizing she'd decided to. The room felt quieter than it had before, like even the building was waiting. She set the pouch aside for a moment and picked up the envelope, running her thumb along the edge before opening it carefully. The handwriting inside was steady, not rushed, not decorative, just clear. And as she began to read, the shop stopped feeling like an empty place she had bought for $10 and started feeling like something she had walked into the middle of. Emily didn't rush through the letter. She read it once, then again, slower the second time, like she was trying to hear the person behind the words rather than just understand them. There was no dramatic confession, no hidden fortune being announced, nothing that tried to impress. It was simple, almost too simple for what she had just found. Samuel Whitmore wrote about time, how he always thought he had more of it, how customers would come and go but the work stayed, how he kept certain pieces not because he couldn't sell them, but because he wasn't ready to let them go. He didn't describe them as inventory. He called them things that mattered to someone once. And then there was the line that stuck with her, the one that didn't explain itself. If you were reading this, you stayed longer than most people would have. Emily didn't know why that line bothered her, but it did. It made the discovery feel less like luck and more like a test she didn't remember agreeing to. She set the letter down and picked up the leather pouch. It was heavier than it looked. When she unfolded it, the soft clink of metal shifting against itself broke the silence in the room. She didn't need to count them right away to know what they were. Gold coins, real ones. Not polished or displayed like collectibles, just weren't enough to show they'd existed in someone's hands for years. She turned one over between her fingers, watching how the light caught the surface. It wasn't flashy. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like something that had been held onto for a long time and then left behind. For a moment, everything became very simple in her head. She could sell these, all of them, if she wanted. Pay for repairs, get the electricity running, maybe even find a small apartment and stop sleeping in a place that still felt like it belonged to someone else. The option was right there, sitting in her palm, easy, immediate, and that's exactly why she didn't move. Instead, she folded the pouch back up and set it next to the letter. Then she looked around the shop again, but this time it wasn't the same as before. Before it had been empty. Now it felt full, not physically, but in a way that made every object carry a little more weight. The tools weren't just tools anymore. The bench wasn't just worn wood. Everything felt connected to a person she had never met but was starting to understand in pieces. The next morning she didn't touch the coins. She didn't even open the pouch again. She went back to the workbench and picked up one of the rings she had found in the boxes. It was slightly bent, the band just off enough that most people wouldn't notice, but she did. She turned it in her fingers, thinking about how it had been made, why it had been kept, why it had ended up hidden instead of sold. Then she did what she knew how to do. She fixed it. It took longer than it should have. Her hands weren't as steady as they usually were, not because the work was difficult, but because her mind kept drifting back to the letter, to the coins, to the idea that she now had an easier way out sitting just a few feet away. She caught herself rushing once, stopped, and reset. Frank's voice echoed in the back of her head, the way it always did when she got impatient. If you rush it, you re-not fixing it, you re-hiding the mistake. So she slowed down, adjusted the band, heated it just enough, let it cool properly. Small steps done right. By the time she finished, the light outside had shifted. The ring looked right. Not perfect in a polished, brand new sense, but complete. Like whatever had been slightly off about it was now settled. She set it on the bench and just looked at it for a second. Then she did something that felt small but wasn't. She cleaned off one of the display cases in the front of the shop and placed the ring inside. That was it, no grand opening, no sign, no plan. Just one ring in a glass case in a store that no one was walking into. The first few days were quiet. No customers, no questions, just the sound of her moving through the space, fixing small things, cleaning what she could, trying to make the place feel less like it was waiting for someone else to come back. She ate simple meals, slept lightly, and avoided thinking too far ahead. Every now and then, she would glance at the hidden compartment, knowing what was still there, choosing not to reach for it. Eventually, someone did walk in. It wasn't dramatic, just the sound of the door opening, a small bell she hadn't even noticed before giving a soft chime. Emily looked up from the bench, a little surprised, a little unsure of what to say. The man who stepped inside wasn't dressed like someone looking to spend money. He looked around slowly, taking in the space, then his eyes landed on the display case. "That yours?" he asked, nodding toward the ring. Emily hesitated for half a second, then nodded, "Yeah." He leaned closer, studying it the way she had studied other people's work for years. "You make it?" She shook her head. "No, I just fixed it." He didn't respond right away, just kept looking. Then, after a moment, he said, "Looks like you did more than that." She wasn't sure how to answer that, so she didn't. Silence stretched for a second, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Finally, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, worn envelope, and set it on the counter. "Got something that might need the same kind of attention," he said. That was the first job she got in that shop. It didn't pay much, not enough to solve anything in a big way. But it did something more important. It connected her to the world outside that door again. It proved that the space could still be used, that the work still mattered, that she wasn't just sitting inside someone else's past. That night, after the man left and the shop went quiet again, Emily went back to the hidden compartment. She opened it, looked at the boxes, the pouch, the letter. She didn't take anything out this time. She just stood there, thinking. The coins were still an option. They hadn't gone anywhere. But for the first time since she found them, they didn't feel like the answer. They felt like something else. A line she hadn't decided whether or not she was going to cross. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment where everything suddenly worked. What Emily built in that shop came together slowly, almost quietly. The kind of progress you don't notice day to day until you look back and realize something has changed. The first customer led to a second, then a third. Not a flood, just enough to keep the lights on and give her a reason to open the door every morning. Most of what came in wasn't glamorous. Broken clasps, bent rings, tangled chains that people didn't want to throw away because they meant something. And Emily started to understand that part more clearly now. People weren't bringing her jewelry because it was valuable. They were bringing it because it held something they didn't want to lose. That shifted how she worked. She stopped thinking in terms of fixing and started thinking in terms of preserving. The difference was subtle, but it showed up in everything she did. She also started going back to the pieces Samuel had left behind. Not to sell them, at least not yet, but to study them. There was a rhythm to his work, something consistent but never repetitive. He didn't rush anything. You could see it in the way edges were finished, in the way small details were handled like they mattered just as much as the overall piece. Emily found herself slowing down to match that. At first it cost her time. Jobs took longer and she worried about that. But the results were different. Customers noticed, even if they couldn't explain why. They would pick up a repaired piece, turn it in their hands, and pause for a second longer than usual before saying thank you. That pause meant something. Money was still tight. There were days she counted what she had left more than once, trying to stretch it just a little further. The shop needed repairs she couldn't afford yet. The wiring was unreliable, the heat barely held during colder nights, and there were moments she questioned whether she was being stubborn for no reason. The coins were always there in the back of her mind. She knew exactly where they were, how many, what they could solve if she chose to use them. And eventually, she did. It wasn't dramatic. No big decision, no speech to herself about what it meant. Just a day where the math didn't work anymore. The electricity bill was due, and she didn't have enough from the job she'd done. So she took one coin. Just one. She held it in her hand for a long time before leaving the shop. Not because she was attached to it, but because she understood what it represented. Then she went into town, found a place that dealt with that kind of thing, and sold it. The amount she got back wasn't life-changing, but it was enough. Enough to pay what she needed, enough to buy some supplies, enough to keep going. What mattered wasn't the money. It was how she used it. She didn't upgrade her life. She didn't leave the shop or try to turn things around overnight. She put the money back into the space, fixed what needed fixing, replaced what was broken, made it functional. And then she went back to work like nothing had changed. That choice, small as it seemed, set the tone for everything that followed. Over time, something else started to happen. People began to talk, not in a big viral way, just locally. Someone would mention her name to a friend, or recommend her to a neighbor. There's a girl over on Maple Street who does good work, that kind of thing. And slowly, the jobs changed. They weren't just repairs anymore. People started bringing in older pieces, things they'd kept in drawers for years because they didn't trust anyone to touch them. A woman brought in her grandmother's ring and said, "I don't want it to look new. I just want it to feel right again." A man came in with a broken chain and said, "This was my wife's. I just want to wear it without worrying it'll fall apart." Emily listened more than she talked. That became part of the work too. She also began experimenting in the quiet hours after the shop closed. Using scraps, old techniques she'd studied from Samuel's pieces, and her own instincts, she started making things from scratch. Not copies, not imitations, but pieces that carried the same kind of restraint and intention. The first few weren't great. She could see the difference immediately. They felt forced, like she was trying too hard to match something she didn't fully understand yet. But she kept going, adjusting, refining, learning. It wasn't fast, but it was real. Then came the first moment that shifted things in a bigger way. A couple walked into the shop one afternoon, not locals. You could tell by the way they looked around, taking everything in. They had heard about her through someone else, someone who had passed along her name without much detail. They didn't have anything to repair, they had a request. "We were getting married," the woman said, setting a small box on the counter. Inside were 2 simple bands, nothing special, store-bought. "These are fine," she added, "but they don't feel like us." She hesitated, then looked at Emily. "We were told you might be able to make something that actually means something." Emily didn't answer right away. She looked at the rings, then at them. This wasn't just a job, it was a question. The same kind of question Frank had pointed out months ago when she first found the shop. "What are you made of?" She said yes. It took longer than they expected. She didn't rush it. She asked questions, listened to their answers, and then went back to the bench and worked through the process step by step. There were moments she doubted herself, moments she started over completely because something didn't feel right. But she stayed with it. When she finally handed them the finished rings, there was that pause again, the same one she had seen before, but deeper this time. The woman didn't say anything right away. She just held the ring, then looked up and nodded once. That was enough. After that, things didn't explode. They grew, steadily, naturally. Emily still used the coins when she needed to, but less often. Each time she did, it felt more like a bridge than a crutch, something that helped her get to the next step. Not something she depended on forever. By the time the seasons started to change again, the shop didn't feel like a place she had stepped into anymore. It felt like something she was actively shaping. The past was still there in the tools, in the pieces Samuel had left behind. In the letter she had read more than once, but it wasn't holding her in place. It was moving with her. And for the first time, Emily wasn't just trying to survive in that space. She was building something that could last. By the time winter came back around, the shop didn't feel temporary anymore. It wasn't something Emily was trying out or surviving day to day. It had weight to it now. A rhythm that carried through each morning when she unlocked the door and each night when she turned off the lights. The display cases were no longer empty, but they weren't crowded either. That was intentional. She never tried to fill the space just to make it look successful. Every piece that sat behind that glass had a reason to be there, whether it was something she restored or something she made herself. And if it didn't feel right, it didn't stay. She still thought about Samuel sometimes, but not in the same way as before. In the beginning, it felt like she had stepped into something unfinished, like she was walking through someone else's life without permission. Now it felt different, not like she was replacing him, and not like she was living in his shadow either. It was more like he had set a foundation without knowing who would come next, and she had chosen to stay long enough to build on it. The letter stayed folded in the same place she had first put it, tucked safely away. But she didn't need to read it anymore to remember what it meant. There were still coins left. Not many, but enough that she could feel them when she thought about it. She hadn't sold one in months. At some point, without making a big decision about it, she had stopped relying on them. The work itself had taken over. Customers came and not because of the story of the shop. Most of them didn't even know it, but because someone they trusted had told them. Go there. She'll take care of it. That was enough. One afternoon, a woman walked in carrying a small box, the kind people use for things they don't open often. She didn't say much at first, just placed it gently on the counter like it might break if she moved too quickly. Emily waited. She had learned that part mattered, giving people the space to say what they needed to say in their own time. Finally, the woman opened the box. Inside was a necklace, old but well kept, the kind of piece that clearly hadn't been worn in years. This was my mother's, she said, her voice steady but quiet. I don't want it changed. I want to be able to wear it without feeling like I'm going to lose it. Emily nodded. She didn't promise anything dramatic, just said I understand and meant it. Work like that had become normal. Not easy but familiar in a way that felt right. Each piece came with a story, even if people didn't always say it out loud. Emily didn't try to fix the stories. She just made sure the object could carry them a little longer. Later that same week, something unexpected happened. Margaret showed up. There was no warning, no phone call, no message. Just the sound of the door opening and that same small bell chiming, like it had for every other customer. Emily looked up from the bench and froze for half a second, not out of fear, but because her mind needed a moment to catch up to what she was seeing. Her mother looked smaller somehow. Not physically, just in the way she held herself, like something had shifted over time. They didn't rush into conversation. Margaret walked slowly through the shop, looking at the cases, the tools, the space itself. She took it in piece by piece, the same way Emily had on her first day. When she finally stopped at the counter, she didn't start with an apology. She didn't explain anything. She just said, "This is yours." Emily nodded, "Yeah." Margaret looked around again, then back at her. There was a pause, the kind that used to feel uncomfortable but didn't anymore. "You built this?" she asked. Emily thought about it for a second. About the shop, the work, the long days, the quiet nights. The choices she'd made when no one was there to see them. Then she said, "Yeah, I did." Her mother nodded slowly, not dramatic, not emotional. Just accepting something she hadn't understood before. "It's good," she said, and for a moment that was all there was. No big reconciliation, no sudden shift back into a relationship that had been broken. Just a recognition, a small one but real. Emily didn't need more than that. After Margaret left, the shop felt the same as it had before. That was the surprising part. Nothing had been undone or changed. If anything, it just confirmed something Emily had already come to terms with. She wasn't building this for anyone else's approval. Not anymore. That night, after she closed up, she went to the back and opened the hidden compartment again. It had become less of a secret and more of a quiet ritual, checking in on something that had once meant everything. The boxes were still there, the pieces still wrapped and resting where they had been for decades. The pouch sat where she had left it, lighter now than when she first found it. She picked it up, opened it, and let the remaining coins settle into her palm. They looked the same as they always had worn, solid, unchanged. But they didn't feel the same. At the beginning, they had felt like a way out. Then they felt like a choice. Now they felt like something else entirely. Not a solution, not a safety net, just part of the story. part of what got her here, but not what would carry her forward. She closed the pouch and set it back in place, exactly where it belonged. Then she walked back to the bench, picked up her tools, and got back to work. The next morning, when she unlocked the door, the light came in a little differently. Maybe it was the season, maybe it was nothing at all. But the shop felt steady, lived in. Not perfect, not finished, but real in a way that didn't need to prove anything. People would come in that day. Some with broken things, some with requests, some just curious. Emily would listen, ask questions, and do the work the same way she always did, carefully, patiently, without trying to rush the outcome. And if someone asked her how she got there, she probably wouldn't mention the coins, or the hidden compartment, or even the letter. She'd just say something simple. I stayed. What stayed with me most about Emily's story isn't the hidden gold, or even the jewelry she found. It's the fact that none of it actually saved her. It helped, yes. It gave her a little time, a little breathing room. But it didn't build the life she ended up with. She did that, quietly, slowly, on days where nothing felt certain and no one was watching. I think that's the part people don't like to hear, because it's not dramatic. There's no moment where everything clicks and suddenly you're okay. Most of the time it's just showing up again the next day, even when you're not sure it's going anywhere. Emily didn't win anything. She stayed. She paid attention. She chose not to take the easy way out when it would be been completely justified. And over time that added up to something real. There's also something honest in the way she handled what was left behind. She didn't treat it like a jackpot. She treated it with respect. That matters. Because in real life, opportunities don't always come as clean, obvious wins. Sometimes they come wrapped in someone else's unfinished story, someone else's regrets, or something that asks more from you than it gives up front. And the question becomes, are you going to use it, or are you going to build on it? For me, the biggest takeaway is this: not everything that helps you is meant to carry you forever. Some things are just there to get you through the beginning. After that, it's on you. Your choices, your patience, your willingness to stay when it would be easier to leave. That's where the real shift happens. And maybe that's the simplest way to put it. Emily didn't find a way out. She found a place, and then she became the kind of person who could make something out of it. That's something anyone can take with them, no matter where they're restarting.